Welcome. Um, there are two kinds of people in this world that, as far as I'm concerned, anyway. The first kind of people is the planner kind. The second kind of people are the non-planner, right? In marriage relationship, usually there's one of each, just to make it more interesting. Um, of course, there are some who are both planners, and then you can see when you go to their house, you can see they're extremely tidy. You look at their fridge magnet, they have checklists, right? But of course, some of you perhaps been to a house, a family where both are non-planners. By looking at the mess at home, and there's just chaos, right? There's no order at home. But generally speaking, and at least in my home anyway, we got planner and non-planner. A planner is this. Planner is someone who write everything down, generally. Write everything down. Their principle is this. If it's not written down, it's not going to happen. That's a planner. Now, the non-planner says the opposite. It's like, well, let's just do everything spontaneously because it's more exciting that way. Surprise me. That's a non-planner. Now, we plan and not plan many things in our life. Yet there are things that I believe, should plan, even though if you are a non-planner, or more serious thing, for example, and I believe we do plan. Even if you're a non-planner, you would plan if you're getting married. If you're a non-planner, if you want to go for a job interview, you would plan for it. At least you would plan how to get there, right? You don't just wake up in the morning, I'm just going to take any bus to wherever. No, you plan for it, even though you are non-planner. So you would plan, even though you're not planner. You would plan for a job interview. You would plan for your wedding day. Now, the question is this that I'm going to talk about today is the priority. When you think about priority, sometimes our priority get jumbled up a little bit. For example, when it comes to job interview, we plan so much for job interview, but we don't plan much at all for doing the job well in the long run. We got the job, that's it. We're done. Wedding day, the same. We plan so much, invested in the wedding day, the 2 hours. Yet we fail sometimes to plan to grow in our marriage for the long run. See, we oftentimes fail to plan for bigger things in our life, for the bigger things in our life. We plan for the little things, but we forget the bigger things. The question is why? Why do we do that? I believe there are many reasons, but one of the reasons is because we fail, or it's difficult for us to grasp bigger things. To grasp bigger things. It's easier to plan for smaller things than to plan for bigger things, right? So to plan for building a Lego is so much easier than to plan for building a big ship. Or destroyer, or a rocket ship. A miniature one, it's easier to do. And so we often say things like this: let's just take it one step at a time for the things that are just too big for us to plan or to grasp. So for example, if you're getting married, say like, how are you going to plan for a good marriage? Well, we're just going to take it one day at a time. Because it's just too difficult to grasp. It's too big for us to understand. See, not many people have the capacity to grasp things that are beyond a few years of their life. So when you get to a job interview, sometimes they ask you, what's your plan for the next 3 years? Oh, 3 years, that's okay. But 5 years, 10 years, it gets more difficult. But how about 100 years? How about 200 years? How about 1,000 years? How about 1,000,000 years? It gets harder and harder to plan and to think about. So we're going to talk about that, and we're gonna look at the book of Exodus. I'm going to welcome us into the book of Exodus by way of introduction that God has a plan. And throughout the book of Exodus will show us that, will reveal to us that God has a plan. Even the opening paragraph that we're going to look at, the first 7 verses in the book of Exodus will show us that God has a plan. So this is going to be a long series of 7 months, but don't worry, we have a plan. There will be 31 sermons, God willing. So today we're going to look at one thing. God has a plan. I'm going to break it down into 3 sections. What is it? The promise. Second one, when is it? The timing. And finally, how is it? The process of God's plan. Okay? So what is it? The promise. When is it? The timing. And how is it? The process. So what is it? The promise. Let's look at verse 1. Verse 1 says this. And these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. The Bible is a long book. It's very thick, like my one is very thick. Right? You perhaps have a thin line version that is minuscule, that is hard to read, that needs magnifying glass. I'm getting older, so I get a big one that has no column, a single column, easy to read. So it's a big book, consists of many books. One single book in the Bible consists of many books. Now, even though there are many books, they tell a single unified story, and that story is God's redemptive plan for his people. That is the one story of the Bible, God's redemptive plan for his people. Now, the book of Exodus, at the very heart, is about this plan of God, this God's redemptive plan of God for his people, the book of Exodus. Now, in your translation, it may not have the word "and" at the beginning of the verse. Though when I read it, I read, and these are the names of the son of Israel, because in Hebrew it has that word "and" in front of it. Now, our English translation, our English Bible don't have that word because it would be bad English to start a book with the word "and." And what? From what? Right? But however, this is to show us that, or to indicate to us that this book, the book of Exodus, is a continuation from the book of Genesis that come before us. This is second book of the Bible. So what comes before Exodus is Genesis. We must therefore, to understand Exodus, must read and understand Genesis. So that's our homework. Hopefully for the next 7 months, you would also read the book of Genesis. Now, so that's why today, by way of introduction, we're going to look back into what happened in Genesis to help us understand the book of Exodus. Okay? So first of all, it says this. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. So the first question for us is, who the heck is Jacob? Because he said, and these are the sons of Jacob. Who is Jacob? Well, we have to go back to Genesis. Genesis 17, verse 15 says this. And God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? Our story started there. When God says to Abraham, you shall have a son, and you will become the father of nations. Now, Abraham laughed. Sarah laughed too, actually. Later on, we read that when God visited them and tell them again. Why? Well, because they're 100 years old. Sarah's 90 years old. Like, have a son? Have many sons? Have nations? That's ridiculous. So Abraham was with a son. He was old. God made a promise to Abraham and Sarah. So So Abraham has a son by the name of Isaac, and Isaac has sons by the name of Esau and Jacob, and this is Jacob, the grandson that we read in verse 1, the grandson of Abraham. So just to confuse us a little bit, when you read the sons of Israel, it actually means the sons of Jacob, because Jacob is name changed by God to Israel as well. Okay, so Israel is Jacob. The sons of Israel here in verse 1 is the son of Jacob. Right? So that's clear. That's introduction. So it's Jacob. So what happened? Jacob has 12 sons. After that, Jacob has 12 sons, and the 11th son, this is the important son. The others are important, but for our story is the 11th son by the name of Joseph. So out of jealousy, Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, and he ended up in Egypt. But the Lord was with Joseph. We can read all this in Genesis. Okay, I didn't make this up. I'm too not creative to come up with all this story. So the Lord was with Joseph in Egypt, and to make long story short, Joseph became the very powerful man in Egypt. In fact, he became the second person in charge over Egypt. And then there was a great famine. So Jacob's and his family still in the land of Canaan, right? But Joseph, successful, become the prime minister, second person in command over Egypt in Egypt. Now what happened is then, because of the great famine throughout all the land, the family of Jacob in Canaan moved to Egypt because of the great famine. The Bible says, from Genesis again, 46, there were 70 people moved. Let's read. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, this is moving from Canaan to Egypt, who were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. So there were 70 of them. So that's how it started. And God made a promise to Abraham earlier on. So let's look at Genesis 46. God made 3 promises in this, verse 2 to 4. And God spoke to Israel, Jacob, in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob, or Israel, Israel. And he said, Here I am. And then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there, this is the promise, I will make you into a great nation. Myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again. And Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. The 3 promises that God made to Jacob in this case, but an extension to God's covenant or promises to Abraham is this. The first one, God called first Abraham, now Jacob, out from his country to a land he didn't know and promised to make him a great nation. The same thing. God called Abraham from his home to Canaan, and now God called the grandson, Jacob, to Egypt. The second promise is this, that God would go with Jacob as his family went to Egypt. That's the second promise. And the third promise is this, that God would bring him back from Egypt. So the second one is to Egypt, God will go with them. And the third one is out of Egypt, and God will go with them as well. God will bring them out of Egypt. The 3 promises, that's God's plan. So the first step that for Abraham and also Jacob to take with this promise, this God's plan, is obedience. So that's the first step, you see, because there's no point of giving him promise or them promise and a plan if they don't obey. So they must obey, and that's what they do, you see. God can say, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. So Jacob obeyed God and went to Egypt. Now, early in Genesis, as I said, I will go back and forth a little bit. Abraham and Jacob, God's promises to them. Now, Genesis 12, verse 1 and 2 says this. This is the very beginning where Abraham's name was still Abram. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. See similarities there between the promise to Abraham and to Jacob. Pretty much the same thing. So what happened there is Abram then packed all his stuff and brought his family to an unknown land. God didn't tell him where to go. God said, just pack up, take your family and go to a land that I will show you. And he did. He obeyed. And that land turned out to be Canaan. And now, fast forward to Jacob in Canaan, he said, now go to Egypt and I will be with you. Both of them obey. So God made a promise to Abraham and also to Jacob, which at that time, I guess, for us it's easy to read this because we know how it ends. But for them, it would be difficult. If you ever moved from one city to another or one country to another, you know how scary that can be when you don't know anyone in the new place, in the new city, in the new country, especially if you have many kids, if there are 70 of you. By yourself, perhaps you feel adventurous. I'll just have a backpack. I'm going to go, right? I'm going to travel for 2 years or for 3 years. But when you have so much responsibility, there's no DHL there. Back then, you can just pack your stuff in a box and say, I'm gonna send this off using DHL or UPS or whatever. No, you gotta carry them. There's no car, there's no plane. You got 70 people in your household, and you gotta do that to a place that you do not know where. So you can imagine that it can be very scary. It's unthinkable, to be honest. Even for us today, imagine your whole family. I don't know how big your family is, but extend your family from your core family to your siblings, kids, and see if there are 70 of them. When you reach 70 people in your family, say, okay, now let's think about how we can plan for all 70 of us to move from Australia, Melbourne, Australia, say, to pick a city, Seoul, Korea. You don't know the language, except for some people here. You don't know any people there, but God says, just pack and go. So for us to do that, it sometimes can be daunting or even borderline impossible. But yet we see both for Abraham and Jacob, they obey. God promised for Abraham is a great nation. It's not a small promise. Remember, he's 100 years old. Wife, Sarah, is 90 years old. They got no kids. God says, I will make you a great nation. Your descendants will fill the earth. A great nation too numerous to count, the Bible says. It's no wonder both of them, Abraham and Sarah, laughed at God's suggestion, God's promise that they could become a great nation. And sometimes we do that too, you see, when God gives us big dreams, promises into our lives that it's too big for us, like this is impossible. What's impossible for us? What's impossible for us is when someone we love have cancer, God said, I will. I'm a God who can heal. We say, well, that's no way. Or when you have a wayward child who ran away from faith, and God says, I will bring him back. You say, that's no way. See, God's promise, by definition, is scary, it's unthinkable, and it's borderline impossible. Yet, God's promise to Abraham is this: I know you're one person now, but I will make you millions. So Abraham went from being sonless, and his family grew to what? To 70 when they moved to Egypt. And by the time they moved out of Egypt, they grew to millions. And that's where our story picks up from the book of Exodus. Now, Exodus 1 verse 7 says this. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land of Egypt, was filled with them. It's almost like when you see too many Asians in Chinatown, it's like, man, is this still like Melbourne? There's so many Asians here. For Egyptians, it feels that way. There's so many Israelites here. Is this our land? Is this our land? The great land of Egypt? Why there's so many Israelites? It feels that way. See, the book of Numbers recorded that there were 603,550 men who were 20 years old and older when they left Egypt, when they get out of Egypt. Over 600,000 men who were older than 20 years old. So scholars believe, they estimated, the total numbers, including women and children, will be around a couple of million people. Some people say that's not accurate because the Hebrew thousands, it's ambiguous. Even, let's say, the list, some scholars say it's only a few thousand still. From one man to become 70 and to become thousands. Let's say it's not millions. Still, it's impossible to imagine if you're 100 years old and you don't have a son. So God promised, first point is this, God's promise often for us is big, scary, and unthinkable, and borderline impossible. So if God's promise is small, then we don't need God, do we? It doesn't have to be God's promise. If it's like big sale, but it gives you what? 1% off of a big sale. Means nothing. So just like Abraham and Jacob, when God gives us a promise, a plan for our life, we require one thing, and that one thing is, the first point is this, we require obedience. And that is a hard thing to do, harder than we think. Because we like to question, don't we? We are scientifically minded people, we are logically minded people, we are educated people, we like to question. And fair enough, we should question. In fact, faith in the Bible, it's about engaging the mind. That we gotta question, that we gotta think, we gotta use our mind. But it's hard for us to obey when it seems like impossible, it's too big. So there are times in our life that we prefer to believe what we read on the news than God's news. If you think about that, you read something from the Bible, God's news, and then you read the news and you believe the news rather than what God says. Of course, we are too polite when we get to that point, we are too polite. We don't laugh at God the way Abraham and Sarah laugh. We simply ignore God, ignore God's words. We just say, well, that's outdated. That's ancient writing. It's no longer applicable today. So we simply live out our lives as if God's promise doesn't matter. That what the Bible says about our lives and His plan for His people matter at all for us. It doesn't matter. If you don't believe me, just look at your life. How do you prioritize your life? What's important in your life? How do you live your life? How you prioritize your life? Does it show that God really matters in your life, or God does not matter in your life? So what's our first point? My first point is this, that God made a promise. It's God made a promise. The Bible calls it covenant, which is an oath-bound contract, so to speak, or relationship between two people or two parties. So in this case, God and Abraham, God and Jacob. So by definition, let me repeat again, God's promise is too big. If it's too small, perhaps that's your ambition. If it's achievable, that you think, I can do this, then it's your goal, not God's goal, not God's dream for you. See, and then I want to say this, leading up to our second point, that obedience, sometimes we forget, it has a lot to do with timing. Let me explain. That obedience requires immediate action, because a delay obedience is disobedience. Sometimes we want to obey God, but we say, later, Lord, later. Have God called you to do something in your life and say, just wait until, and then you set your terms? That's a delay obedience, and that's no difference to disobedience. Imagine I'm asking my kids, just clean up your room, please. And they say, yes, Dad, we'll do. A month later, then they do it. That's disobedience. That's not obedience. And oftentimes we do that with God because it's too big for us, or we believe news more than God's news. God is not as important as we think He is. So we give excuses. We say to God, we will, but, right? When God calls young people this day, they say, God, I know you call me into mission, you call me to do this, but let me get married first. Or when God says, I want you to do this, and you say this, God, let me focus on my career first. God asks you to do this, God, let me wait until all my kids are out of home. There are people who say that to me, like, in his heart, God calls him to do something. But his excuse is like, I still have kids that I need to feed and all those stuff. As if when you follow God, God will not feed you, right? That's the assumption, isn't it? So he said, like, I want to wait until all my kids are grow up and have their job out of home. Then I will follow what you want me to do for you. Oftentimes we live like that. That is disobedience to God's call. So my questions for all of us before I'm moving on to second point on timing is this. Is there something that God requires you to obey and perhaps you have been dragging on or you've been delaying to obey? Something for you to think about. I'm going to leave you with this quote by Eugene Peterson. He says this in his book. The basic conviction of a Christian is that God intends good for us and that He will get His way in us. He does not treat us according to our deserts, but according to His plan. Let me say that the first part again. The basic conviction of Christian is that God intends good for us and that He will get His way in us. Sometimes we think we cannot obey because what God wants for us will get in the way for what is good for us. So we want to delay that. When God want to bless us, want to call us into His mission, and we delay that. So second thing that I want to talk about, what is it? The timing. Well, let's jump to promise number 3. We look at promise number 1. Promise number 3, we're going to go back to promise number 2. What is promise number 3? That God will bring Jacob back to the promised land, out of Egypt. That's promise number 3. But that's not all, you see. Let's read that again from 46, Genesis 46, verse 4. God says this, I myself will go down with you to Egypt. That's the second promise. And the third promise is this. Pay attention to this. I will also bring you up again, right, down to Egypt, up back to a promised land, to Canaan, and Joseph shall close your eyes. What's God's promise here? Well, God promised, yes, I will bring you back, Jacob, but you'll be dead. You'll be back in a coffin. Joseph, your son, shall close your eyes. So I guess, I'm guessing, Jacob didn't think that God's promise would bring him back in such a way, would he? And God said, I will bring you back. But yet God brought him back in a coffin, so to speak. He's dead by the time this happened. See, this leads me and all of us to a second point, that obedience is not enough. There's something more to obedience. Imagine moving to a place, as I said, to a country, a city, out of obedience to God, and then disaster strike, and God wants you to move again. Abraham moved out of obedience. Now God says to Jacob, move again out of obedience to God. So Abraham first moved to his family to Canaan, and now his grandson, move back or move down to Egypt. See, what happened here is Jacob's obedience is being tested. Imagine God promised Abraham, like, I'm going to take you to the promised land. And he's in the promised land. He's in the land of Canaan. And now God says, go down to Egypt. What happened to the plan, God? Did I miss you? Did I fail to hear you correctly? Am I not in the place right now where you want me to be? Why this great famine? Why now we have to move again? Oftentimes, obedience is not enough. It requires more than obedience. See, God is testing Jacob's obedience here. Jacob's need to trust God, not just obey God. Sometimes we obey, but we don't trust God. Husband and wife, you can obey your spouse, especially if your spouse getting angry with you. But that does not mean you trust your spouse. You just do it so that you don't have an argument. But you say, well, I'm going to do it. I don't agree with you, but I'm going to do it. God testing Jacob now that obedience is not enough. You got to trust me, God says. So we need to be faithful as well in obedience. We need faithful obedience. In other words, obedience in the same direction for a long period of time. Can you do that? That's faithful obedience. Obedience in a long period of time in the same direction. That's what God wants. Faithful obedience. Why? Because God never seems to be in a hurry, you see, as we shall see. That's why it takes 7 months for us to go through Exodus. God is not in a hurry, we're not in a hurry. Well, not really. Sometimes we can feel that way. Let me on the side note, let me say this. Sometimes this has been done has been applied incorrectly. For example, God say, I will go down with you to Egypt. So when you want to do something crazy, you say, promise of God said, God will go down with me. So now I'm going to do this, God will go down with me. Well, hang on. Is that from God or from you? We cannot just take God's promise or what he will do to Abraham and Jacob and apply it to our life without clarifying it. Sometimes we just do crazy things. We just, resign because we don't like our job, we don't like our boss, and say, God will go down with me. Really? So we have to be careful. We cannot just do that, okay? And so, God is not in a hurry here. In fact, we cannot rush God's timing. We must trust God's timing to carry out his plan. Imagine when Abraham read this carefully again and say, well, okay, I'm going to move, and then Jacob will move again. My grandson will move again, and then you promise to bring him back, but he'll be dead by then. It's like, what's going on? Imagine thinking that through. So times has passed. It's really quick when we read this, but time has passed. 400 years has passed by the time they move and by the time God take them out of Egypt. 400 years, that's a long time. Just trace your family history 400 years back. Do you know the name of your whatever who lived 400 years ago? So you know the name of your father. Perhaps you know the name of your father, but do you know the name of your grandfather? That's probably about 400 years, maybe. What does he do? Where did he live? Which street? What kind of food he loves? What kind of lifestyle they have 400 years ago? A long time. So God promised, and then it didn't happen for 400 years to take them out of Egypt. Can you imagine that? A long time. That's God's timing. Faithful obedience is what's required, not just obedience. Because if you just have obedience and you don't have faithfulness, you will start questioning God. Your faith will start wavering. You just start questioning everything. You will not have security. You will not have peace. But faithful obedience requires us to trust God. Obedience in the same direction for a long, long time. Even if it means that you may not be alive to see God's promise come to fruition. So we don't like that, right? We don't like that. If you're living like me today in the 21st century, we don't like this. 400 years, that's too long, God. That's too long. We don't like this. We don't like what this called faithful obedience. I want to be obeyed, but I want to see it now. I don't wait for 400 years. I don't want to wait for a long time. We want it quick. We want it instant. We want everything quick. Because waiting is difficult. Even waiting for a doctor is important. It's difficult. I'm guilty of that. I'm very impatient when I have an appointment with doctor, right? These are professionals that have secretary and everyone. And when they say, okay, your appointment is 2 o'clock, I come there 15 to 2, and then 2:30, I'm still waiting. I'm generally impatient. I'm trying to be more and more patient, but I'm not there yet. If we are honest, even though if you are extremely patient person, 400 years, it's a long time. Because waiting for God to rescue you out of Egypt, your Egypt, whatever that is difficult because waiting will expose your hearts. When I'm getting impatient, it exposes my heart that my time is important. I am important. I've got better things to do than to just sit here in the waiting room. It exposes what we love. It exposes whether we love God or we love our time, that we love ourselves. We exposes that do we love God or do we love God for what He can do for us? Because during waiting, we lose the grip of control in our life. You imagine when you have something that is not so good in your body and then you do a medical checkup and you have to wait for the results. If you haven't had that moment, maybe you are too young. But trust me, you will one day get to that point where you do a test and you're anxious to wait for the results. Perhaps exam, right? Just say exam. You gotta wait. You gotta wait for it, and as you wait, you realize that you don't have control over the things that you're waiting for. That's why waiting is very difficult. We want to take charge. When I'm impatient in waiting, I want to take charge. I want to take control. And God let us wait so that we lose that grip of control in our life, to show us that we don't have control. Only He has control. We may have the illusion that we have control of our life, but we don't. And when we wait, God exposes that, made us realize that we do not have control. See, it's easy for us to obey God when everything goes well, right? When you get promoted, it's like, well, that's God's blessing. But how about when the opposite happens? When you get redundant? When you move to a better job, that's good, you know. When you get a bigger home, that's nice. But how about when you get demoted? When you have to move to a smaller home because you lost your business? Yes, God has a plan. And we see this in His promise to Abraham, to Jacob, and also we'll see to us, all of us Christians. But God also operates in His own timing. So the first part, God's promise, requires obedience. And second part, God's timing, requires faithfulness. Put this together, what we need is faithful obedience to God. And we see that here in the book of Exodus. So plan and timing of God. Before we get to third point, let me ask this question. Have you been praying perhaps for something in your life that you're waiting and waiting for God to work miraculously in your prayer? And the message for us is this. Not only that we must trust God or obey God in His promise, but we must trust God in His timing as well. We need faithful obedience. I'm going to give you another quote from Eugene Peterson. There's a great market for religious experience in our world. There's little enthusiasm for the patient acquisition of virtue. Little inclination to sign up for a long apprenticeship in what earlier generations of Christians call holiness. Religion in our time has been captured by the tourist mindset. Religion is understood as a visit to an attractive sight to be made when we have adequate leisure. So Eugene Peterson, in his book called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, says, we are not used to this anymore. We want everything instant and quick. We don't like to be in training for long. Like in Japan, I watched a documentary that he works for this master swordsman who make, katana. There's only about 30 of them in Japan today. And he's been apprenticeship for 15 years and he's still a trainee. Can you imagine that? It's unthinkable. We got people in apprenticeship for 3 months and they want to run their own business. Same with religion, same with Christianity, same with God. Oftentimes we say, God, I'm ready. I'm so ready. God said, no, you're not. And we engage Christianity, religion, worship of God as some sort of entertainment and leisure, rather than obedience for a long time in the same directions, faithful obedience. In the olden days, they call that holiness. We don't value that anymore. Third point, how is it, the process? Verse 6, exciting verse. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation died, all dead. Very exciting, isn't it? Death is the end, but not with God. For most people, death is the end. So in the Bible, though, when someone died, someone significant, named, died, it signals a time of uncertainty that is to come. Always in the Bible. When someone died, it signifies something uncertain is coming. And there's nothing more clear than the book of Judges, where series of judges rule and dies. Every time a judge died, the people, the Israelites, the people of God began to rebel against God and worship idol. Every single time, without a fail. So when someone named significant died, it signifies that uncertainty is coming. So what we've learned so far, the promise of God requires our obedience. The timing of God requires our faithfulness. What is God doing now that Joseph is dead and all his brothers and all his generation died? What happened now? Well, it just shows us that this is the process. This is how God operates. This is God's process. This is how God works. So what's the process? Death. That is the process. Let me explain. Remember God's promise to Abraham? A one person, 100-year-old man, really old man, without a son. I will make nations out of you, too numerous to count. And then come Jacob, 70 of them, move to Egypt. And now, by the time we read this opening passage, there are millions of them. Or by the least estimate, thousands of them. And for that to happen, for God to lead his people, God requires death. God requires this process of death to happen first. That's God's way of working. And that's not how often we like to think, right? If I say to you, let's make it, so God's want to grow Abraham, one person, to millions, right? So that's the goal. Death probably is not the solution, isn't it? That's not how you want to grow. Right? If you want to grow from 1 to 1,000,000, you don't kill. Why would you kill? It's like if you have $100, I say, I'm going to make your $100 $1,000,000. Grow that into $1,000,000. How you do that? Well, I say, burn that $100. Cut it into 2. Throw it in a bin. Is that how you would grow $100 into $1,000,000? No. But that's how God works. Death. From one person to millions through death. Before we look at further, this is what God says in Isaiah 55. Verse 8 to 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. If you want to grow a family, we breed like crazy. But that's not how God thinks. God is showing his people, the Israelites, this. That for them to grow, for them to be walking in sync, in faithful obedience to God, they need to depend on God, not on themselves. And God bring about that dependence to God through death. Well, you see, Joseph was a powerful man, second in command in Egypt, throughout the land, a rich nation, a powerful nation. He has a lot of influence, and then he died. How drastic is that? A powerful man, the hope of Israel, God's people, they're looking up to him, and he died. They would have thought, that's it. God's promise is now gone. Our number one guy is now gone. Even all his brothers, all the generation, they're all gone. What hope do we have? Yet that is exactly how God works. Exodus 1 verse 8, we're jumping ahead now. One verse ahead for next week, in a couple of weeks. Now there arose a new king over Egypt. This is the number one man. Joseph, the number two man. This is the number one man. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Of course, did not know, not in the sense, who's Joseph? No, of course, that's not what it meant. He did not know in the sense that he doesn't care what Joseph has done. You just need to read Genesis again. The amazing thing that Joseph has done for Egypt and throughout the land to preserve life. And this king arose and doesn't care about Joseph. Yes, Joseph might have been dead physically, but this is more than that. Because he might be dead, but his influence might live on. The king arose might still respect Joseph's generation or descendants. But it says here, a new king arose, did not care or did not know Joseph. God says is this, I'm going to strip all your idols. I'm going to strip all your gods. I'm going to strip all your people that you look up to, that you relied on. Some of us rely on our siblings. Some of us rely on our parents. Others rely on their children, on their job. What are you relying on in your life to sustain you, to make you who you are today? Is it your job that make you who you are? Imagine if God stripped that away from you. What would that make you? How would you live your life? Is it your spouse? Imagine God take your spouse away from you. Is it your children? Imagine all the things in your life, God stripped that away. Why is God doing that? God is killing your idols to say, you only need me. And that's what is God doing to Israelites. God is stripping off their idols to say, you need to depend solely on me. Now, it is painful for them to experience this, especially if you think about you. Take this personally. Imagine something that you love or someone that you love so much being taken away from you. Whatever that is. When something is taken away from you, then you realize this, that you don't really need that. See, one of the hardest things for people that I know that I can relate, so I'm going to talk about me, is when you earn a lot of money and God says, I want you to quit that and do something else that earn nothing. The first thing that comes to mind is this, how am I going to survive? How am I going to survive? I'm going to pay rent. I'm going to send my kids to school. That's the first thing come to mind. But when you lose that and you still live on, well, God is showing you, you don't need that, do you? You only need me. This is God bringing about death of your idols to show you that you have worshipped something else or someone else apart from Him without unknowingly. So when God do that in your life, He's merely showing you that you need Him, not the things that He's taken away from you. See, human beings love to worship. Everyone worship, whether you're Christian or not, religious or not, everyone worship. We just choose what to worship. We choose different things to worship. Some worship sports, some worship their job and career, some worship their relationship. That's the most important thing in their life. That's define who they are. So we worship what we love, and God is showing his people through death, through this process of death, that they only need him to accomplish God's great purpose. From one person to millions, into Egypt, out of Egypt. They don't need Joseph. They don't need a person of influence in power. Sometimes we think that way, don't we? We want our nation to be great, to be good. Because of Christian, we want to vote for Christians. That's what we think, right? Because that's how God works. God said no. God can work even through pagan nation. In fact, oftentimes in the Bible, God sent pagan nation, idol worshippers, to take over Israel, just to show them that God is in control. So sometimes, through this process of death, God is showing us that sometimes our love, see, we worship what we love, but sometimes our love is misdirected. And in the language of the Bible, it's called sin. Our love has been misdirected, and God, through death, the process of death, God is merely realigning the directions of our love, of our worship to him. So let's go back to promise number 2 that we skip into Egypt. We skip out of Egypt, right? So promise number 2 is this, that God would go with Jacob as his family went to Egypt. Now tell me, what are the gods out there that says that will do that for you, that will go down to whatever he sent you to? See, you won't find other gods that does that. They may give you the advice, the plan, the rules. This is how I want you to do, and you go get them. But God of Israel says this, I will send you to Egypt. Go down to Egypt. I will go with you. Only the God of Israel does that. He's not a God so lofty and so big to send us his minions to do his dirty job. God says, no, I will go with you. You go, but I will go with you. See, God will go down to Egypt with his people. But how about us? You may say, I'm a Christian, but how about us? How about me today, Lord? Are you in this with me? See, this is the beauty. I'm going to close with this. That God's faithfulness in his promise stretches beyond Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph. It reaches, his promise reaches and includes you as well today. To Abraham, to Jacob, God says, I will go down to Egypt with you. For us today, and 2,000 years ago, God's Son, Jesus, said, I will go down, not with you. What did Jesus say? I will go down for you. And that's what Jesus did. He did not only say, I will go down with you. He says, I will go down for you. Now, if there are somehow other gods that are willing to go down with you, tell me if there's any other gods that says this, that he will go down for you. See, on the cross, Jesus went down for you and me. On the cross, Jesus died so that you and I may have eternal life, so that death is nothing to be scared of. It's God's process. Death is not the end, you see. In Christ, in Jesus, the moment you breathe your last in this life, that very moment, you breathe your first of eternal life. How does that happen? Because Jesus said, I will go down, I will die for you. I will die for you so that you will have eternal life. So because God went down to Egypt with Jacob, they learn, God's people learn, and will take this 77 months, over 30 sermons, to learn about this, that they will walk in faithfulness. God will train them and teach them to walk in faithful obedience to God. Now, because Jesus went down for you and me by being crucified on the cross, we too, you too, me too, I too can learn to trust God in His plan, in His promise, that we can walk in faithful obedience to God. Our God has a plan. Our God has a plan. The question is, are you in His plan or are you out on your own plan? Let us pray.